There was a morning when the sun rose just like any other day, but inside one man's heart, everything felt dark. He had prayed, yet nothing changed. He had believed, yet the door stayed closed. As he sat quietly, holding his Bible, a single thought pierced his soul. What if today is not about asking God for more, but thanking Him for what I already have? That moment changed his life. Beloved, many people wake up every day carrying yesterday's disappointment, tomorrow's fear, and today's pressure. They begin the day with anxiety instead of assurance, with complaints instead of confidence. But I have come to tell you this with deep conviction. The way you begin your day determines the direction of your destiny. If you begin with gratitude and trust, heaven aligns on your behalf. If you begin with fear and doubt, your heart closes to what God is already doing. Gratitude opens your spiritual eyes. Trust anchors your soul. When these two walk together, miracles are born quietly, consistently, and powerfully. Today is not an ordinary day. Today is a divine invitation to begin again, to begin rightly, to begin with gratitude and trust. Gratitude awakens the presence of God, beloved. When we speak about beginning today with gratitude, we are not speaking about a polite habit or a religious routine. We are speaking about a spiritual force that awakens the presence of God in your life. Gratitude is the first language of faith. Before you see change, before you feel strength, before the miracle manifests, gratitude announces to heaven that your heart is aligned with God's reality, not your circumstances. Many people wait until life improves before they thank God. They say, when the door opens, I will praise Him. When the answer comes, I will be grateful. But faith works in the opposite direction. Faith says, I will thank God now because I trust who He is, not just what He does. Gratitude does not ignore pain. It rises above pain. It does not deny struggle. It declares God's sovereignty in the middle of struggle. When gratitude comes first, God's presence follows naturally. In Scripture and in life, we see this truth repeated again and again. God is drawn to thankful hearts because gratitude is evidence of humility. A grateful heart says, God, I recognize that everything I have, even my breath today, comes from you. And when God sees that posture, He responds with nearness. The presence of God is not forced by effort. It is attracted by gratitude. There are many people who pray earnestly, but feel distant from God. Often, the missing key is gratitude. Complaints push God to the background, but thanksgiving brings Him to the forefront. When you complain, your problem becomes big and God becomes small. When you give thanks, God becomes big and your problem shrinks to its proper size. Gratitude realigns your spiritual vision. Gratitude also changes the atmosphere of your soul. Anxiety cannot survive where thanksgiving is practiced daily. Fear loses its grip when gratitude becomes your habit. A thankful heart becomes a resting place for peace, because peace flows naturally from trust. When you wake up and choose gratitude, you are declaring that today will not be ruled by yesterday's disappointment or tomorrow's uncertainty. Today will be ruled by God's faithfulness. Even in seasons of loss, gratitude has power. You may not be thankful for what happened, but you can be thankful that God did not abandon you in it. You can be thankful that His grace sustained you, that His hand protected you, that His Spirit comforted you. Gratitude in pain is not weakness, it is mature faith. It says, God, I still believe you are good, even when life is not. When gratitude awakens God's presence, you begin to sense divine guidance more clearly. Decisions become less confusing. Your heart becomes quieter. You stop rushing and start trusting. The presence of God does not always remove the storm, but it calms the heart within the storm. And that calm becomes your strength. Gratitude also prepares you for greater blessings. God cannot entrust abundance to a heart that is never satisfied. But when you are faithful with thanksgiving in small things, God knows you are ready for more. Gratitude is stewardship of blessing. It tells God, I value what you have already placed in my hands. Today, when you begin with gratitude, You are not just changing your mood, you are activating your faith. You are inviting God to walk with you through every conversation, every challenge, every decision. Gratitude opens the door, and God steps in. So begin today by thanking Him for life, for breath, for grace, for unseen protection, for lessons learned, and for promises still unfolding. When gratitude becomes your first response, the presence of God becomes your constant reality. And where God's presence dwells, transformation is inevitable. Trust releases God's power beyond understanding, beloved. If gratitude opens the door to God's presence, then trust releases the power of God into your life. Trust is not a feeling, it is a decision. It is the quiet yet unshakable confidence that God is in control, even when everything around you feels uncertain. Trust is faith resting. It is the soul saying, God, I place my life, my future, and my unanswered questions in your hands. Many believers truly love God, yet they struggle because they trust Him only partially. They pray sincerely, but they still worry endlessly. They declare faith with their lips, but their hearts remain burdened with fear. Partial trust produces partial peace, but complete trust releases complete surrender, and surrender invites God's power to move freely. Trust is required especially when understanding is absent. There are seasons when life does not explain itself. Prayers seem unanswered. Doors remain closed. The future looks unclear. In those moments, the human mind demands logic, but God asks for trust. Trust does not mean everything will make sense. It means you will stand firm even when it does not. It is saying, God, even if I do not see the way, I know you are the way. When trust is activated, fear begins to lose its authority. Fear feeds on uncertainty, but trust feeds on God's character. Fear says, what if? Trust says, even if the storm continues, God is with me. Even if the answer delays, God is faithful. Even if the path changes, God's purpose remains. Trust releases power because it removes resistance. God does not force His will upon a fearful, controlling heart. But when you trust Him, you stop trying to carry what only He can handle. You release the burden, and God releases His strength. Many people are exhausted not because life is heavy, but because they are carrying what God never asked them to carry. Trust brings rest to the soul. Rest is not inactivity, it is confidence. It is knowing that God is working even when you cannot see evidence yet. When you trust God, you sleep better. You think clearer. You speak with greater calm. Your decisions are guided not by panic, but by peace. There is also a divine exchange in trust. When you trust God with your weakness, He entrusts you with His strength. When you trust Him with your future, He entrusts you with His peace. When you trust Him with your pain, He entrusts you with His comfort. Trust opens the channel through which divine power flows into human limitation. Trust is often tested in waiting seasons. Waiting exposes what you truly believe. Anyone can trust God when answers come quickly, but real trust is revealed when time stretches and silence lingers. In waiting, trust matures. It becomes deeper, purer, and stronger. Waiting does not mean God is inactive. It means He is preparing something greater than you imagined. Trust also requires releasing control. Control is the enemy of faith. As long as you must know every detail, you will never experience supernatural peace. But when you say, God, I trust you more than my own understanding, you enter a higher realm of faith. That is where miracles begin quietly, often unseen at first, but powerfully. Today, God is not asking you to understand everything. He is asking you to trust Him completely. Trust Him with your family. Trust Him with your finances. Trust Him with your calling. Trust Him with your timing. Trust Him with the doors that closed and the ones that have yet to open. When you begin today with trust, you shift the weight from your shoulders to God's hands. And those hands have never failed. Trust releases God's power beyond human understanding. And when His power is at work, no obstacle can stand, no delay can defeat you, and no fear can control you. Gratitude heals the inner wounds of the soul, beloved. Many people carry wounds that cannot be seen by human eyes. They smile in public, but inside they are bruised by disappointment, rejection, failure, and unanswered prayers. Time passes, but the pain remains. If these wounds are left untouched, they harden the heart, weaken faith, and silently drain joy. But gratitude has a healing power that reaches places no human comfort can reach. Gratitude does not pretend that pain never happened. It does not deny betrayal, loss, or delay. Instead, gratitude looks at pain through the lens of God's faithfulness and says, "Even here, God was with me." Healing begins when you recognize that God never abandoned you, even in your darkest moments. Gratitude opens your memory to God's presence in the past, not just His promises for the future. Many wounds remain open because people constantly replay what went wrong. They relive conversations, regrets, and moments they wish they could change. But gratitude gently redirects the mind. It shifts your focus from what was taken to what was preserved, from what failed to what survived. You may have lost something precious, but you did not lose God. You may have been delayed, but you were not destroyed. Gratitude reminds you that grace carried you through. When you begin thanking God for lessons learned in painful seasons, your wounds begin to close. What once felt like punishment begins to look like preparation. What once felt like rejection begins to reveal redirection. Gratitude gives meaning to suffering, and meaning is essential for healing. Pain without purpose breaks the soul, but pain with purpose builds character and faith. Gratitude also softens the heart. Unhealed wounds often turn into bitterness, and bitterness quietly poisons the spirit. But gratitude dissolves bitterness by reintroducing humility. It says, "God, I may not understand everything that happened, but I choose to trust that you are still good." That choice releases healing. Forgiveness becomes possible. Peace becomes accessible. The heart breathes again. Inner healing is not always instant. It is often progressive. Gratitude must be practiced daily. Each time painful memories rise, gratitude counters them with truth. Each time sorrow speaks, gratitude responds with hope. Over time, the emotional weight becomes lighter. The wound no longer controls your reactions. You stop responding from pain and start responding from wisdom. Gratitude also restores identity. Pain often lies to you, telling you that you are forgotten, unworthy, or broken beyond repair. Gratitude confronts those lies by reminding you of who God says you are. It reminds you that you are still chosen, still loved, still called, and still valuable. When identity is restored, healing accelerates. Many people are waiting for external change before they believe they can heal. But healing begins internally. Gratitude begins the work on the inside, even while circumstances remain the same. As the heart heals, perspective changes. You begin to see life with greater compassion, patience, and understanding. You become less reactive and more reflective. When gratitude heals the soul, it also frees you from the past. You stop being defined by what hurt you and start being defined by what shaped you. Your testimony gains depth. Your faith gains authenticity. Your life gains purpose beyond your pain. Today, God is inviting you to allow gratitude to touch the places you have protected for too long. You do not have to reopen wounds in despair. You open them in faith. As you thank God for carrying you through what once nearly broke you, healing begins to flow. Gratitude does not erase your story, it redeems it. And when your story is redeemed, your soul is restored. Trust gives courage to move forward, beloved. One of the greatest enemies of destiny is not failure, but fear. Fear freezes potential. Fear keeps dreams locked inside the heart. Fear whispers that you are not ready, not capable, not strong enough. Many people know what God has placed within them, yet they remain standing still, because fear has convinced them that movement is dangerous. But trust gives courage to move forward, even when the path is uncertain. Trust is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to obey God despite fear. Courage is born when trust becomes greater than hesitation. When you trust God, you stop asking, "What if I fail?" and begin declaring, "Even if I fail, God will still guide me." That mindset changes everything. You no longer move based on confidence in yourself, but confidence in God. God rarely reveals the full journey at once. He reveals just enough to require trust. If He showed everything, faith would not be necessary. Trust means taking the next step without needing to see the entire staircase. It means believing that the same God who guided you yesterday will not abandon you today. Each step forward becomes an act of worship. Many people delay obedience because they are waiting to feel ready. But readiness is not a feeling, it is a response. Courage often comes after action, not before it. When you step forward in trust, strength rises to meet you. When you move, grace moves with you. God supplies what you need at the moment you need it, not before. Trust also silences the voices of doubt, both internal and external. There will always be opinions, criticisms, and warnings from people who mean well, but do not see what God has shown you. Trust anchors you in God's voice above all others. It gives you the courage to move forward, even when you stand alone. There are moments in life when staying comfortable is more dangerous than stepping out. Fear makes safety look attractive, but trust reveals that growth requires movement. The greatest regrets often come not from what we tried and failed, but from what we never tried at all. Trust gives you permission to try again, to begin again, to rise again. Trust-driven courage also reshapes failure. When you trust God, failure no longer defines you, it refines you. Every step, whether successful or not, becomes part of God's shaping process. You stop seeing setbacks as signs to stop and start seeing them as lessons to grow. Courage matures when you realize that God's plan is bigger than any single moment. Trust empowers you to leave what is familiar. Sometimes God calls you forward by asking you to release what feels safe. That can be frightening. But trust assures you that what God has ahead is greater than what you leave behind. Letting go requires faith, but holding on to what God has already outgrown in your life can delay your destiny. When trust gives you courage, your posture changes. You walk with purpose instead of hesitation. You speak with clarity instead of fear. You act with obedience instead of excuses. Courage does not mean you will never feel afraid again. It means fear will no longer control your decisions. Today, God is calling you to move forward, not recklessly but faithfully. Move forward in prayer, move forward in obedience, move forward in love, move forward in purpose. You do not need all the answers, you only need trust. When you trust God enough to move, He meets you on the way, and each step taken in faith brings you closer to the life He has prepared for you.